Oh my gosh, it's Tails! The Final Horizon is the third highly anticipated DLC rollout for Sonic Frontiers, promising both a new endgame for the majority of players who found the original to be underwhelming. Can I skip this? And fully playable characters in the form of Amy, Knuckles, and Tails, something we haven't seen in a 3D setting since 2006. The excitement couldn't be ignored. It felt like all the major complaints people had were slowly being addressed one by one, culminating into one last hurrah. Now that it's here, wow. This is some of the most polarizing reception any Sonic media has received. Mixed bag couldn't be a more applicable term. What the heck was that, Knuckles? When loading into Uranos, you get a new notification saying that a portal has opened up to another story, letting you access what is essentially an alternate ending. Rather than overriding the existing content and risking the termination of anything we may have enjoyed, we're given two different finales to choose from, allowing the old one to remain intact for preservation's sake, while still offering a new one to the players who were left unsatisfied. It actually encourages you to beat the game normally once and then come back later. It even has its own save file, so you can replay it from the beginning anytime you want. Also, during this video's production, Sonic Team released a patch addressing some pretty major complaints. So I'm going to proceed as normal, explaining what I played at launch, and then I'll interject if anything was changed. So what is the Final Horizon? It's a retelling of the story's end with completely new cutscenes and dialogue, all taking place on a revamped Uranos. It's the same exact map as before, which admittedly does worsen the Chronos art fatigue the game already had, but everything on the island is either new or heavily modified. Guardians, puzzles, music, cyberspace, glitches, every single open zone obstacle course, and yes, the 4 playable characters. It's a team effort this time to get the Chaos Emeralds, with everyone splitting up and doing their part. After you complete a few objectives, you'll trade off to someone new for a bit doing the same, starting with Amy, Knuckles, Tails, and then back to Sonic to conquer his own trials. Once you've done that twice, it's final boss time. At the end of the day, it's more of what you've already seen. Grinding on floating rails, platforming, collecting items, questioning everything. If you liked Frontiers before, you'll probably like most of this update. And if you didn't, then I can't say it'll win you over. However, what's imperative to understand is that they kinda cranked it up to 11. In everything except its name, this is a hard mode DLC. Guardians are more aggressive, puzzles require deeper thought, platforming is the most intricate it's ever been, automation is at an all-time low, and there are no 2D sections anywhere. So, if you thought the base game was a little too easy, strap in. Let's talk about Amy, the first character you get to play as. She functions a lot like Sonic, with her main attributes being a triple jump and a glide afterwards. The gameplay is all about precise platforming, conserving your jumps, hovering to safety, and a lot of verticality thanks to the heights she can achieve. Much like the Coco challenges, everything feels more fleshed out and conducive to a higher level of interaction. There are some really cool sections in here, hopping into a cannon while it's facing away from Eggman springs, switches that have to be pressed on her hover's descent, tight as can be rail grinding way up high with little to no safety net. Oh, Davy Jones! Running along explosive platforms, dodging them in midair and taking a leap of faith to get past. Jumping around big floating towers that you could play carefully by taking the homing attacks and lower platforms, or be a bit riskier and soar above the whole thing with a well-timed boost. There are a lot of shortcut opportunities to take using this triple jump. If you know where something is, you can cover huge distances to grab it, bypassing entire structures in the process, a hallmark of 3D Sonic that we love very much. Now, it's not all pleasantries, unfortunately. Every character in this game does come with a short list of baggage, teetering on short essay in some cases. Amy has a delay on her homing attack. About a quarter second after I press the button is when the input registers. Same thing with her Psyloop. I don't know why these are here because Sonic doesn't have them, but it's an ever-present pacing issue that compromises your accuracy just enough to nag at you the whole time. Her double jump also goes a lot higher than Sonic's, which is a fine compliment to her playstyle, but every time you jump, the camera follows, often pushing the platform beneath out of sight, meaning you have to keep manually pointing it back down to see where you can land, and that can get tiresome with how often it happens, especially if you want to stay alert of what's ahead too. I'm used to it now, but this wasn't something you had to do very often in the regular campaign, so it definitely took some time to adjust. It would be nice if you could shorten the jump to your liking by letting go premature if you didn't always want to go to max height. Letting go early does affect your first jump a little bit, but not the second. Depth perception isn't on the game's side either. It's a common mistake to miss your mark thanks to an unreliable drop shadow, which I'm guessing is why the platforms are usually so big. And while there are highlights, there's also plenty of fairly generic platforming, or just weird one-off gimmicks, like these sedentary spike balls. Ah, I get it. They're in your way, so you just hit them. That's it. What? Overall, though, Amy is still a lot of fun to play as, probably my favorite of the trio for how well-rounded she is. You get a lot of freedom to bend the rules without completely breaking them. After completing 5 objectives, we swap to Knuckles, introducing us to how these multi-layered pillars work. Wow. This is actually a pretty cool mechanic. You glide over to the opening for a clear shot, and then move around the pillar while lasers rotate with you as you chip away to lower the spring. Really unique stuff, but I wasn't used to the game being that thought-provoking, so on my initial playthrough, I just ignored it, never knowing what the solution was. Amy also interacted with these, but not in the same way. Care to share with the class what the heck you just did? Regardless, how is our boy? What are we in for this time? Well, as expected, he's all about gliding and wall climbing, a slower, more methodical gameplay style leaning into some puzzle elements. Climbing in particular really gets to shine here compared to Sonic, who never had much going on with it. It's kind of funny how Knuckles' treasure hunting in the adventure games was always seen as secondary or inferior to the traditional speed stages, and now we have an entire game that's basically one big treasure hunt, roaming around a giant map, following waypoints, and collecting items. Meanwhile, the traditional Sonic levels here are seen as the afterthought. I couldn't help but see the irony in that. Execution really is everything. This is proof that Knuckles doesn't have to be the token hunting guy detached from everyone else to fit in. He can have gameplay similar to Sonic with a rugged twist. And I think Frontiers has some really solid ideas. Climbing the inside of a massive tower, flying around to each side, looking for bombs to detonate and clear a path. Navigating a vertical laser grid, avoiding cannonballs and punching signs to make a giant spring appear. Or, thinking outside the box, you can use said cannonballs as homing points to make it up without the hassle. Gliding onto rails, then jumping off to get extra height and reach more pillars. I love this kind of stuff. You even have to dodge a few enemies while climbing. They're getting better, folks. They're learning. Look how excited Knuckles is. He's climbing things even when he shouldn't. What are you doing, man? People are watching. Gliding through a bunch of boost rings, breaking blocks, steering to avoid the bomb walls. This is where the delay on impact is actually kind of nice. It makes it feel more powerful. My favorite is definitely when you get to be really high up and fly around a pre-made course, dodging debris. This is the quintessential Knuckles gameplay I see going forward. And yes, if you get to a high enough point, you can jump off and glide over the whole island getting to your destination. Surprisingly though, it wasn't that broken. When you don't know the layout in advance, there are only so many corners you can knowingly cut, and sometimes you have to take a certain route to get through properly. This is also where you can see that the floating asset spam has been fully embraced. They couldn't make the island any bigger, so when in doubt, build higher. We've upgraded from spaghetti grind rails to giant cubes, prisms, towers, and dare I say, it may look better like this. It's not going to win over any naysayers, but it's like roaming around a chaotic Code Lyoko world, and I find some appeal in that. How about the pop-in, though? How's that doing? I see. Yeah, no change here. This is... oh boy. Unfortunately, while I do see the positive side here, Knuckles is not without his healthy share of snags. When I first took control of him, I nearly called the police. That same homing attack and side-loop delay is back, and his gliding has a despicable wind-up animation that stops you in place before taking off. Every single time, and it feels just as wrong as it looks. It would be like giving Tails a delay on his flight. Oh no. This took a very long time to get the hang of, and even at its best, is never going to feel as good as it did in the adventure games when it was instantaneous. If I press a button on my controller, it's because I want the function to happen right then. This is not a slow Souls-like where you have these long attack animations to account for. It's a high-speed platformer. Responsiveness matters. And the turning, oh my goodness, someone get me a coffin. It's so heavy and delayed. I fail to see the advantage that fishtailing like a semi brings to the table. Maybe if the delay wasn't there, it would have been okay, being able to stop and start if I overshot something, but combined, it was not a great time. Turning around requires a full rotation of the analog stick. Pressing back when facing forward does nothing. It won't even start the animation. And that goes for turning of any kind. If you move the stick too quickly in an opposing direction, the movement will not be able to keep up, ending before it begins. This is what creates that waggling back and forth chaos where you can't get him to go straight because the Echidna processor is running on Vista, and the camera can have some interesting effects on this too. Say you're gliding to the side and you move the camera the other way. Knuckles will start turning that direction automatically. That would be fine. and normal if it weren't for the heaviness delaying the motion. Now your camera movements are too fast for his to keep up, throwing you out of sync on top of the analog issues already present, and that can complicate things. One time I was holding right, I turned the camera, then pushed all the way left because I wanted to change directions, and nothing happened because I didn't gently rotate into the correct position. Now let's apply that to a situation where I'm platforming and need to do things accurately. I fell off a wall, then boosted away to reorient myself. It's clearly to Knuckles' right, so I press in that direction, and nothing happens. Unfortunately, I've already started moving the camera in anticipation for where I thought he was going, so now the game registers me holding right relative to his current position and sends me in a completely different direction that I gotta roll with. Unless your objective is dead ahead, you will encounter this fiasco enough times to say, hey, let's not. And if you're flying towards the camera, forget it. Left and right may as well be synonyms. The only way to make turning reliable is by mashing glide while you rotate. This will continuously restart the animation while keeping you in place, although I don't think most players will figure that out, nor would I call it a real fix. Also, when you're gliding, if you're trying to look at something not directly in front of you, like maybe below since you're so high up, if you don't touch the stick for a couple seconds, the camera will default back to the front, which isn't horrible, it's more of a nag, but this is where little things like that can start to add up and set you off, especially because we're not even done yet. I wish I could say that was the end, but wall climbing, it's got its own subculture that needs elaborated on. Despite working pretty well overall, there are some troubling nuances. Geez, where do I even start? When you jump off a wall, it pushes you away from it. This wasn't a problem in the adventure games because the control was so fluid you could land right back on the spot you let go of. In Frontiers, you can't move after a single jump. You are locked in place. Only after double jumping can you start the turnaround animation, which has a weird arc that you have to account for, making it somewhat difficult to land back on the same spot. Plus, you're a lot heavier in this game, so unless you double jump immediately, you're likely to fall lower. A negligible occurrence on big pillars, but small patches don't have that same luxury. And you might say, well then don't jump around small climbing areas. Problem solved, right? No. Sometimes a jump is the only thing that can save you from the truly abominable hit detection. If you go to the edge of the red or green material, it doesn't stop you from going past, so you can test its boundaries. You either fall, climb up something you weren't supposed to, or whatever you want to call this. Corner collision is downright barbaric, sometimes knocking you off without a jump to recover, or it'll make you slide down into this unbreakable animation that, depending on how short the platform is, will cause you to fall off anyway. The only way out of it is to jump, which again brings us back to that weird arc you'll have to learn your way around. If you climb to the top of a platform with a ceiling or ridge though, it can knock you off facing the other way and disabling your control for a couple seconds somehow so you can't even boost back on. What is this? How did this make it in? Ironically, boosting can be detrimental for this exact reason. It carries a lot of post-impact momentum, making you climb up a little bit after you let go. So, if the platform is already super small, then that might be all it needs to send you packing. I am loading the chamber. Climbing across narrow platforms without something messing up should be celebrated on a national scale. There goes that weird arc again, lowering me, so I gotta boost on, but then that pushes me too far up, so I gotta try and get back onto it, and not really sure where to go. Maybe I can jump over here. Nope! Alright, let's try this again. Get on the wall. And Knuckles. Knuckles. Please. No. I'm not losing this. We're bringing it back. Get me over here. Okay. Okay. Now, gently tap. Would you excuse me for one moment? Even just attaching yourself to a wall isn't as straightforward as it should be. To get on one, you can either walk up it, jump, glide, or boost. What you may not be aware of is that you actually have to be curled into a ball to grab on while jumping. If you let go of the jump button about 2 seconds after, Knuckles automatically uncurls and you can no longer stick. The same thing goes after a glide. If you let go and free fall, he will not cling to it. This is one of those rules that you could go the entire game without knowing due to how oddly specific and unclear it is. Especially because when gliding or boosting, if you let go of the analog stick, you'll touch the wall without grabbing it in the same fashion, but if you press it again, you can still attach midway even though you were late. A feature the normal jump could have benefited from but doesn't, and now feels like an inconsistency. Doesn't help that there are instances where the collision straight up doesn't work either. Like gliding towards a wall and I don't grab on for whatever reason, so I start falling. But then when I jump, it kicks me off as if I was already climbing it. What kind of dump truck logic is that? Am I on or not? This whole structure gave me such a hard time on my first playthrough. Second time around, no problem. It's one of my favorites now, but man, That initial attempt got personal. Everything that could go wrong did. I glided into the wall, it didn't grab, so I panicked and boosted, causing me to run into the top, flipping me around and leaving me to improvise, not to mention the camera is left entirely in your hands to figure out. Speaking of which, the control is once again inverted depending on where you're looking. Climbing straight up is normal, but if you pan down, it inverts. Now up is down and vice versa. Ground control, however, doesn't behave like this, so if you walk into a climb from that angle, Knuckles will immediately go back down, rejecting your free will. He also does that weird Mario 64 turnaround when you're going straight up or down and then do a 180 the opposite way. But not if you climb straight up and then pause before going back down. Then it's normal. Even in regular movement, he has these big arcs no matter how gently you rotate the stick. And if he happens to do one around the edge of a pillar, he'll go to the other side, changing his position so the directions get all messed up again, sending him the wrong way. I'm in disbelief at how many strange functions there are. I meant for this to be a quick tangent, but I just kept finding more, and I left some stuff out. Like how jumping off this wall has an invisible force pushing me to the right. I think it might have something to do with the enemy underneath, but why? A lot of polishing up needs to be done if they want to bring this back again. When it works, I can have quite a bit of fun as Knuckles. Keep the camera behind, avoid big turns while gliding, unless you can thread the needle. Let's go! But he is absolutely the most problematic character. If you're going to get upset playing as anyone, it's Mr. Echidna. Okay, so quick update. One of the big things they fixed in the patch was Knuckles. Gliding around no longer controls like clam chowder. There is no wind-up delay upon activation anymore where he freezes in place, allowing you to stop and start immediately. And the turning is almost as smooth as the adventure games. The other issues are still present, but fixing these two alone puts in massive work to make his playstyle far more palatable. If you hated it before, give it a second chance, it might just be redeemed. Leaving us with Tails, and this is where it gets interesting because while he doesn't do anything that different from the other two, he has some of the most unique set pieces on the island. Flying is his game, of course. Hold the jump button down to get some height and fly over to where you need to be. Meanwhile, throwing some homing wrenches at nearby enemies or breakable objects. So that's where they went. Also, he can do this. I don't remember that in the skill tree. Sometimes you have to defeat a bunch of enemies in midair before your flight runs out to make the wall open up. It's kind of spammy and one-dimensional, but a little better when you have to dodge attacks under a time constraint. Revealing dash pads that let you side-loop around a disconnected signpost, sometimes launching you over a gap, which is kind of cool to see that even works. A platform riding auto-scroller where you have to break the walls to not get pushed off. A neat change of pace, even if still quite basic. Popping all the balloons before they respawn mid-flight so you can get in the green hoop while avoiding the pink ones that send you back, going higher and farther as you continue. There's a massive puzzle room where you have to hit switches to deactivate laser walls, shorten pillars, and blow up crates to reveal more. An entire island way off in the ocean that has its own room-changing gimmick, pushing walls around to get to the center. When it comes to locations, Tails has it made. It's just everything else that doesn't measure up. He really doesn't have much to his name that the other characters aren't already capable of. He flies vertically to gain a lot of height like Amy's triple jump and can move around during it similar to a glide. The only thing unique about him is being able to maintain the altitude and having a ranged attack. It's not that special, and so a lot of people view him as the weak link in the trio, especially when he already can't climb walls or do the homing attack. Yeah. That was a curveball. The reticle still shows up, but that's only for your wrenches, even whenever it's an object that you can't throw them at. Also, you're telling me Knuckles gets one, but not Tails? What kind of world are we living in? It's fine in his own sections because they're built around not having one, but it means that you can't interact with most of the other platforming elements because so many rely on the ability to home in. Trying to manually land on a spring doesn't feel great. Again, depth perception is not your friend. You know what he does have, though? A delayed flying animation. Round of applause. What is this game's obsession with delays, man? When I'm moving horizontally, it's okay, but vertically, this is a pace-breaking load screen I have to endure every time I use his defining ability. There's no advantage to it, it's just an inferior way to take off. I guess it gives you a couple seconds to look before you rise, putting some oomph into the movement, but the trade-off isn't anywhere near worth it. There's also no flight meter to know when you're gonna run out. Not a big deal, but it seemed like a convenience they would have added by now, especially in a game that already has a stamina meter. I still like Tails for the locations he gets to visit, but the platforming takes a big hit in quality. I don't even think he grinds a single rail. In his own sections, anyway. Overall, at their best, I think these characters are pretty fun and have a lot of unique areas to explore, but there is a lot of baggage you have to wane through, mainly for Knuckles and Tails. We're not done yet, though, because each character also has a skill tree, and this is where the progression of Final Horizon comes into play. Aside from collecting Chaos Emeralds for the plot, your main objective is leveling up. The majority of items on the map are skill piece cocoa, color-coded for the one who can obtain it. In fact, all of the platforming areas are marked with pink, red, or yellow to show who it's meant for. These are essential in unlocking abilities to make traversal more fun, like the spin dash, which everyone gets to have now after they saw how positively we all reacted to it. Unfortunately, the size and importance of the tree is heavily embellished. It starts with a few basic moves already unlocked, like jumping, double jumping, and boosting, things that were never on the skill tree before because they're so basic, making it appear bigger than it really is at a glance. Then you also realize that 3/4 of the menu is all stuff Sonic could already do without needing to level up, like stomping, power boost, parry, basic attacks, Psy-loop. And most of these can be unlocked really quickly into the playthrough to where you can have half the tree completed in a matter of minutes. So to say that each character has their own skill tree is a stretch. They each have a Sonic skill tree that you will max out the essentials of so quickly you'll wonder why you even had to. The main attractions here are definitely the spin dash, costing 40 points, and that sounds like a lot, but if you gun right for it, you can get that in 10 minutes tops. The stomp, which gives Amy a high jump when held down, although for some reason Knuckles and Tails have, you guessed it, wind-up animations that hold you in place for a second. Yes! What is the insistence on putting these delays in everything? All it does is make me use the ability less. If you have to include it, make it so if you tap the button, you do a normal stomp, but if you hold it down, it charges up the big drill animation to deal more damage. That would give you more control and would suck less. Each character also has their own unique power boost animation, which is pretty cool. Amy gets a wheel of cards that can even drift. Knuckles turns into a drill, and Tails hops in his tornado, letting him fly anywhere. Once again, though, there are wind-up animations. Wow, this is actually starting to make me mad. Anytime you boost with max rings, you gotta wait a second before taking off. This includes when you want to change direction, air boost, slow down to see what's up ahead, or when the terrain itself brings you to a halt. I don't think I need to explain why this is irritating beyond belief, but let's just say there's a reason why it never controlled like this before. You know what's funny, though? Knuckles doesn't have it. And it feels great. It's just Amy and Tails. Well, now you're not even consistent. Amy has no delay on stomping, but Knuckles and Tails do. Knuckles has none on his power boost, but Amy and Tails do. And Tails has nothing on his homing attack, because he doesn't have one. This game is a Rubik's Cube of poor decisions. Also, given that Tails' power boost enhances his ability to fly, it would have been cool to see the other characters be given the same treatment. Like if Knuckles could power boost into a glide, or Amy could card bounce during hers. Take away all the delays, and these could be some really fun, fast movesets to play with. There are a few character-specific abilities you can unlock, like how everyone gets a special move to use on these signs. It's kind of like their quick Psy-loop. Amy has a multi-lock-on that I didn't bother getting because it didn't sound useful, but then I ran into a part that wanted me to use it, and I didn't know, so I got stumped until I figured out some roundabout way to get through. Every now and then you will get to a section that requires a certain ability, and it may not be clear which one you need. Especially with how many workarounds there are for so many collectibles, it feels alien to be locked out completely. I remember on my first playthrough, I couldn't tell if Amy was meant to climb walls or not because she wouldn't grab them normally, except for this one right in the beginning area. What, are you trying to confuse me? Or this Tails section that needs his wrench platforms to get higher. This is what popped all those balloons at once and stacked up the sound effect. Man, that is loud. If you woke someone up with that, they might never come back. The most broken ability in the game, though, is Tails' tornado. An awesome reference to adventure fans, but it flies in any direction, only limited by your boost gauge. So if you draw the infinity sign beforehand, you can go anywhere as high as you want. Even without it, you can bypass everything. If you wanted to skip the spin dash and go right for this, which is both cheaper and doesn't have any prerequisites in front of it, you can grab 80% of his collectibles without needing to play the game. It's kinda cool, but what you're left with is barely any content. This either needed to be deeper in the tree, nerfed, or make more challenges revolve around it because this is too much. Also, every time you unlock a skill, it puts you back on the ground after leaving the tutorial, so if you wanted to take a shortcut from up high, you'd have to refrain from using those new points until you got back down. It's not a big deal, it's just weird that it's even like this. One thing you may have noticed about these skill trees, however, is the near total lack of combat options. Aside from a basic 1-2-3 hit combo, a charge move, and a special attack, all doing the same amount of damage, there's nothing to use on enemies. No flashy attacks or combos to chain together, just a punch and a parry to hold your own. So unless you enjoy spamming one move and dodging to wait for the enemy's attack to finish over and over, I'd recommend skipping these. There are no minions on Final Horizon, only Guardians, and they have all been so beefed up with crazy new attacks and HP that you won't be able to put a dent in them at level 1. Even on a maxed out Sonic, they are damage sponges, taking minutes to kill. Master Ninja is the only one that still goes down quickly by default, but it's a much more hectic fight now, so you will get hurt if you don't parry or dodge a lot. Caterpillar ditches the rail grinding in favor of its beta attacks, using a ton of projectiles that can't be parried. There's also a ton of slowdown during certain phases, and the cross slash did not want to aim. It didn't want to activate either, but that's a separate issue. Tank is another constant barrage of unblockable bullets that often come out from the weak point that you're supposed to hit. So you gotta dance around and wait for an opening. The problem is the attacks are so instantaneous, there's no predicting any of it without getting your hands dirty. Nice. Silver Hammer is a maniac. Flying all over the place at random, playing hot potato with itself. The actual fighting portion plays out identical to before, but reaching the head is a new kind of chaos. And the camera doesn't do a dang thing to help you. Spider has seen the most change out of all the Guardians, with a completely new set of attacks.
Hey Knuckles, watch this.
No more free falling, you don't side-loop its legs, and you can't even deal damage until you break its armor by side-looping 3 circus mines to fire them back at the body. A feature I did not figure out on my own, so I just messed around until I gave up. How you doing? Don't do this while he's moving, by the way. It's all but a guaranteed miss. Look at that smug guy bobbing. And the camera is especially bad here. It's too zoomed in to see when the homing missiles come out, or where the other mines might be while you're running in circles. Sometimes they just spawn in front of you too. Zoomed out, I found it to be much clearer on what was happening, preventing any cheap shots. The best part of Spider though, or I'm sorry, Spider Plus, what do I have to sign in, is that it's the one Guardian that the other characters can actually beat faster than Sonic. If you quick side-loop the body 3 times, it'll turn black, hardening in place for you to give the final blow. But Sonic can only do this twice on 1 meter. Then he has to refill it. Amy, Knuckles, and Tails, on the other hand, have 3, 4, and 5 special attacks per meter respectively. So if you get good RNG on the phases and break the armor right away, you can finish him off in seconds, turning a somewhat long, awkward fight into a crafty quick kill. This is a really cool secret that Frontiers actually does quite a bit, but often goes overlooked for how obscure it is. Like if you get to Silver Hammer's head and quick side-loop it, it'll destroy all of its tower segments, leaving it as a lone cranium losing its mind. Look at this pandemonium on screen, it's awesome! There's still no way to anticipate any of the explosions, but at least the weak point isn't hovering in the sky out of reach anymore. And you can parry the spikes after dodging the ground pound to slow it down. Side-loop the head a second time and you'll destroy the collar around its neck. Build up a third one and it dies instantly regardless of HP. That is awesome. You gave me a hectic fight that wasn't brutally unfair but still had the chaos of one. I used mobility to gain an advantage, a skill that requires meter management, and it got more intense as I chipped away at its defenses. Like the enemy was becoming more desperate to survive the closer it got to death. Every boss should behave like this going forward. There's something very primal to video games about beating up a giant sentient head. For the record, the side loop completely changes the other fights too, albeit in a less exciting way. Caterpillar and Tank were pretty dangerous and, truthfully, annoying to figure out. Did I mention how good the camera is? But if you continuously side loop them, they can't even fight back. Just caught in a loop where there's no retaliation at all, going to the opposite extreme where now it's boring. Unlike Spider and Tower though, there's no way to kill them quickly, so once again, do not fight these as anyone besides Sonic. You will be so profoundly bored. The only one that works no matter who you are is Ghost. And that's because there's no combat. This was a highlight of the original game, and I'm happy to say it's only gotten better. There are some wicked courses for you to go through. A giant wall-climbing tower with a surprising amount of alternate pathways, more if you play as Knuckles. Just don't fall when getting the portal gear. I lost my double jump. Scattered platforms that were really hard to land on using Sonic compared to Knuckles, who can glide and grab onto the red towers. Unless you spin dash, then never mind, there's a convenient bump on each one. Almost feels intentional. And that's probably what most players will do because that final section is stressful, taking place over the edge of the island. Of course, you can still air boost back if you mess up. Unless you get stuck in a wall climbing animation that takes away the air boost, and a spooky maze where you have to hit switches to reveal the correct path. No, the solution is not complicated, but it will put you in a panic. The longer you take, the more rings you lose, and even if you side loop in place to get some back, it'll shoot a vortex at you, draining your ring count faster so you can't sit still. This one really impressed me. I was legitimately scared during it. Maxed out rings, not so much, but hey, not bad. All in all, the Guardians are a mixed bag. I'm tickled by the hardcore spin. A couple were even pretty good. Go get them, girl. But man, were they a pain to figure out, and that's assuming you're playing as Sonic. The other characters have no redeeming combat potential. Amy versus Silver Hammer might be one of the most unpleasant experiences in a video game. Knuckles isn't much better either. This is the whole fight. Okay, so this was another problem that was addressed in the recent patch. Amy, Knuckles, and Tails have all been given a chasmic buff to their attack strength. So much that they've overcorrected, and now people are upset about this too. As early as level 40, you can shred Guardians in seconds. Tails is a machine. A weapon of pure chaos. While a shocking turn of events that might make you laugh, these new damage values end up creating the opposite problem where now enemies are way too easy. Not to mention the disparaging contrast to Sonic, who still takes 1 or 2 minutes to get a kill. Now, I didn't enjoy fighting as any of these characters before, so subtracting their combat duration is a net positive for me. Even if way too overpowered, demanding a nerf in some way, I'd rather have a short, boring fight than a long one, so I do consider it an improvement. More on that when I get to Superstars. Plus, certain ones like Ghost and Spider still need to be interacted with ahead of time, and if you really wanted those old fights back, you can stop leveling up your attack around 10 or 20 and you'll be at a similar underpowered strength. I think the worst part of it all though is that there's no point in going through any of it. You get one portal gear like always, but the island is filled with them under these treasure signs. You'll have so many from playing the game normally, you won't ever need to fight. And even then, the gears only get you into cyberspace, which is borderline optional now. The one mandatory collectible in Final Horizon is Lookout Coco. These are needed to unseal the 5 big towers that Sonic has to climb and shut down. And you can get these by completing cyberspace missions in the same way that you got vault keys in the base game. The difference is that these Coco also happen to be riddled all over the island under those same signs. I don't even know what these were on my first playthrough. I gathered so many by running around casually, I never had to question it. I thought the towers were unlocking by themselves or something. So despite their inclusion, you don't have to fight a single enemy or open a single cyberspace portal to beat the story. Sounds considerate, especially if you don't like the combat. What have you done? But then you realize, wait, if I don't have to fight anything, then what's the point in leveling up anyone's stats? Nothing. Attack, defense, ring capacity, even speed, you don't need to touch. The spin dash will already propel you at maximum acceleration, you'll have a power boost as an alternative, and trust me when I say you do not want to control Knuckles at max climbing speed. There are a couple instances where you have to give a certain number of Coco to the Elder and Hermit, but it's something really low like 30. And almost immediately into the DLC, you can get a Starfall Plus, which takes away the slot machine and replaces the star bits with items. Coco and seeds are all over the ground now with a heavy Coco bias, and when you grab one, it starts to auto-increase your total amount, so if you keep getting more, that number will go up exponentially higher. And when the night's done, some kind of a multiplier must be taking effect because I went from 358 to over 3,000. What? Yeah, I mean, at that point, max are out, sure, but why even make me level up if you're just gonna give it all at once? Shock value? You know what, that's fair actually, well done. The only thing you need to go out of your way to collect in the overworld are skill points, which is a bit of a bummer because a good 20% of the island's platforming gives you seeds of power and defense. Crates even hold 3 to 5 now to compensate for only having one island to max out from scratch, but since you don't need any of them, you'll probably end up skipping most of it. The puzzles are totally optional too. Not only is the seed unnecessary, but revealing the map only matters for completionists because your current objective is always marked. You can beat this whole DLC without even looking at the map. A real shame too, because they took a lot of feedback into account here. These are some of the best puzzles in the game. They're still always going to be viewed as a distraction from the main stuff you want to be doing, but by simply adjusting the time limits to be strict, the head game alone is a massive improvement. The fact that I almost failed the quick stepping minigame was enough to flip my entire world upside down. I actually cared about how I was playing. I couldn't believe it. The free-falling ones I thought were great. Not only do you have a real time crunch to worry about, but there are spinning spikes trying to cut you off. Real hazards, people, they finally did it. You can't spend too much time setting up your shot going slow. You gotta dive down for most of it and be accurate. The panel puzzle was always my favorite, no complaints there. Honestly, I could have done with more. Looping all the flames out when they're far apart is a little less interesting, but once again, caring about how fast you go does wonders for the player's investment. Tetris was fine yet again. I can see a lot of people looking at this and thinking, why? and that's perfectly understandable, but taking a minute to observe a cryptic stack of blocks to replicate its orientation has a satisfaction. The light pillar was always interesting to me because it's more about sound, listening to where the next one spawns, and I'm pretty sure it's by a waterfall on purpose, so you have to pay extra attention. Some definitely got a lot more creative this time, like homing attacking these artifacts at the angle that sends you through all the squares, and then it surprises you with an extra sequence at the end, barely making it. Even better, I think I solved one the wrong way. I assume you're supposed to make all 4 flames appear to get 4 different platforms in a circle to make enough contact with the orb, but I could only get 2, so I just jumped and boosted to keep up with it, and it worked. The laser mirror puzzle was actually a puzzle this time. I really had to think about where I was pointing these. Jumping on moving platforms in the correct order, good stuff. Simple but effective escalation. Basketball makes a grand return at 3 different occasions, and they're all pretty tough. Aiming isn't 100% accurate, but so long as you face it straight away, it's a solid free throw competition. The craziest one was the island-wide race where it zooms out all the way, letting you see the whole map, which was pretty awesome, and then you gotta run to 3 different points. If you have the spin dash, you'll be fine, but I thought it was a novel idea. Now, there are a few duds. It's not a perfect roster, sadly. Jump rope is back, and you can still hold the parry, so it's more like watch rope. Pressing switches, The punching bag that's undefeatable by anyone who isn't maxed out. There's a time trial placed right in front of Tails after you take control of him for the very first time, and he can't beat it. You have to come back later when you're faster, or someone else. What an insult. For the most part, though, these minigames were such an improvement, I didn't mind going out of my way to solve one. I only wish there was more incentive to. All you're getting in return is a seed that you most likely won't use, and the tiniest piece of map revelation. It's never a solid chunk either, it's always scattered blips. The only other artifact that reveals the map are these Archimedes Cocoa found within the character-specific platforming. And these tend to reveal a bit more, but you're gonna have to do both if you want to get some decent vision or be able to fast travel. Now, it's time for Sonic. This is where things get fun. Not only is Final Horizon a hard mode Uranus, it combines with Rhea as well. 5 massive towers to climb, even more treacherous than before. I enjoyed Rhea for what it was. Cool setting, back-to-back platforming, pit in the stomach to not fall, but it did go on a bit long, and there was a sizable chunk of 2D that made me consider antidepressants. These trial towers, though, are a cut above the rest. They feel like the ultimate combining of all the critiques the open zone platforming received. Too easy, too much automation, 2D isn't fun, wall climbing is broken, certain skills activating on accident, all of that is gone. The focus is very much on tight, deliberate platforming with automatic segments few and far between. They still exist, but there are so many nail-biting jumps now you actually appreciate when you can kick back for a few seconds. The whole update is in 3D like I said, so no deflating transitions into the second dimension here. Wall climbing is only used in big bursts where it can't mess up, and there are so few enemies, accidental skills are uncommon to see. Tower 1 is pretty straightforward. It employs a lot of elements seen in the Coco challenges from Update 2. Basic homing chains, boosting off ramps to reach the necessary height. There's one troll part that gets a lot of people, but it's only because we overthink it. No! You have to side-loop around these dash panels that'll push you off. Except they won't. Assuming you haven't adjusted your running deceleration, let go of the analog stick and you'll stop dead in your tracks with no penalty. It's a total fake out. Even if you do fall off, you can hold the parry to recollect yourself and look for the nearest homing target or platform to land on. This goes for all the towers. If you're too far away from something, start dodging in its direction and hold on to your double jump and boost as long as you can. So much of the frustration I've seen from other players could have been avoided by using these simple tactics. It's really not hard, it's just a matter of knowing what risks you can take and how to recover. Alright, just home in on the handle and what have I done? Afterwards, we have simple platforming around the Eggman pads, albeit with a somewhat bugged wall climb. If you boost into it at an angle, it can send you flying diagonally, which is really scary and shouldn't happen. Thankfully, that's the only bug on this tower, the rest is quite sound. I like this camera angle that points up. It's a small thing, but it varies up the perspective and gives you a brief glimpse of what's coming up ahead. More pads to avoid and some cool skips if you're willing to get risky. Bounce jumping carries a minor advantage, as always, for cutting corners. It can definitely look like a level editor at times with all these floating, slanted platforms and jagged orientation, but never to the point of Kaizo. It's more like a Mario Sunshine secret course, if anything, only with more opportunities to go zoom. I like it. A lot. Tower 2 is where people get tripped up. You get some foreshadowing with these big cubes at the bottom, and then we start the main gimmick. Miniature Cubert-esque formations where you jump on tiny platforms to get higher against a varying assortment of obstacles. Sometimes it's as simple as getting to the top, other times you'll have to look around for a hidden switch under a block. Maybe the camera chimes in. How do I get off that mailing list? Bombs will get thrown into the mix and you gotta get to the safe zones while they detonate. Now you have rings, so you could just take a hit and move on, or trigger it and walk away, but it's a neat idea, occasionally broken up by more cube jumping with one at the end that's quite daunting. Unfortunately, there is a side you can slide off of and need to jump to regain composure, which may not be clear. I know the spin dash can put in some work, but I refrained from using it so I could see how the regular way stacked up. Final Horizon gives Sonic the spin dash if you didn't already have it unlocked, so they definitely encourage you to give it a shot. You'll still have to unlock it in your main file though, they are separate. The only part of this tower that'll really throw you off is if you fall and have to redo this homing attack chain because the blocks are gone. So tilt that camera down and hold forward to make it safely. It may look scary, but it's all a matter of tightrope walking this one strip, and then you can jump within range of the pulley. Don't do anything too risky and you'll be good. After the patch, however, these walls now respawn after you get a certain distance away, so rejoice. The other trap is if you don't hold forward after getting launched here from the beginning, your double jump won't reach the nearest cube without a boost, something you may not realize until it's too late. There are no checkpoints on these towers, so falling all the way back down is a hefty price, and that's where the vast majority of rage comes from. Thankfully, like I said, hold the parry, look around, and that should never happen. You can also set it to easy mode to make a bunch of balloons appear, but that's not for me. I'm really good at these. Tower 3 is where wall climbing gets to see decent integration. Going inside buildings, getting to the top, rail launching off to the next set piece, breaking into the massive open room with a couple of cool shortcuts using homing targets and a wall climb boost jump. Now that's one of a kind. It becomes derivative at a point when it stops evolving in favor of sticking to what it knows best, like climbing up tower chunks and jumping to the next with maybe a few homing squares in between. No real innovation or obstacles, just kind of more of the same until the end. So I definitely think they could have pushed themselves a bit further on that, but I still had fun. Jumping around big spaces, zipping through the air will always be one of my favorite things to do in 3D Sonic. Although this was way easier than the second tower, both in my playthrough and everyone else's, so a rearranging of the order should have been considered. Tower 4's gimmick is a combining of fans with rail grinding. Balancing as you boost on up to the next level, it's a neat sensation. You can really see the Coco Challenge influence here. Rail rings to spin and launch yourself off to miraculous heights, even pressing switches while you carefully land on the next set. The only thing I struggled with was knowing that I had to quick side-loop these pads. In hindsight, I should have experimented with the when in doubt side-loop it mentality that the whole game has, but I had to look this one up. Maybe add a notification that pops up if you're stuck on it, or just take it out, because it's really no different than hitting a normal spring. Some of the rail collision is in question as well. Tower 5 is the big finale, pure platforming and running. There is a lot of space to play around with, letting you perform some really fun boost jumps, cutting past all the suspended prismatic ruins lining your path, and cannons to save you if you fall. It feels kind of like a cyberspace stage with how dense it is compared to the others, and brings an element of speed that wasn't here before now that we have a bigger area. Minimal automation too, aside from the homing chains and an auto-run sequence that serves as a fun break to jump over enemies and a fitting end before reaching the top. There is one part where the quick step would be perfect but still overshoots like in Forces, sending you over the edge, which is really lame because it's spotless otherwise. That goes for the whole shebang. Barring a few hiccups, I was so pleased with these tower climbs. They scratched that tense platforming itch that the main game could only tease me with, and I loved every second of it. These might be my favorite parts of the entire game now. But that's merely one half of the journey, for at the top of every tower is a new Coco with a cutscene that plays at a struggling frame rate and then takes you to one of 5 combat trials to prove your worth, each more challenging than the last. Except not really. The first is actually my favorite, the Dragon's Trial. This pits you against 5 white soldiers, the most you've ever taken on at one time, and they've been significantly sped up to be a far more deadly adversary like the Guardians. You can still hold the parry forever, and that's going to be your main tool, but there is a time limit to discourage any dilly-dallying, and your stats are fixed at level 1, allowing these challenges to be a lot more controlled and consistent, rather than trying to accommodate for a player who could have any number of stat combinations like in Battle Rush. While still a bit easy, I thought it was a good start. Let's see where they go from here. They completely butchered it. The Snake's Trial is made up of 4 identical shell enemies who, despite all being in the same room, must be defeated one by one. These were already not a favorite of mine because all you do is side loop the shield off, wailing away until it comes back. And that is exactly what you do here 4 times. Stats are back at level 1 and the shell speed is increased, which for a normal enemy would make things a little harder or at least more hectic. But the only thing that does here is make their shields return to them faster, so you have to re-Psy-loop it off at a much higher frequency again and again. Nearly 2 minutes of circle, punch. Nothing changes besides my impending narcolepsy. No escalation in difficulty or strategy, combining of assets. It's the same boring task, copy and pasted. One that a lot of players actually struggled with, because if you're too close when punching, Sonic can get stuck in this delayed animation, only letting you get 2 hits in per cycle, instead of the 3 to 5 necessary to win before time runs out. I was lucky and got it on my second try, so when I came to the internet to find a bunch of comments saying they were stuck on here, posting guides on how to beat it, I was so confused. I was gearing up to a get good speech, but then when I replayed it, I realized what was happening. It wasn't a matter of skill. It was malfunctioning combat, to the point where a secondary method was found where you bait the shield far away and then keep parrying it up close, which is faster and more direct, kinda cool when you first pull it off. It's almost as if you're treating the parry like it has perfect timing, since you want to get as many hits in as you can up to the very last moment. But it's still the same 2 moves over and over in a similar time frame, so it doesn't help the repetition much. And most players won't even think to try that anyway, because the opening prompt tells you that all of your skills are disabled except the Psy-loop. Now, parrying isn't on the skill tree, so they're technically not lying, but you might think that the Psy-loop is the key to success when it's billboarded right in front of you and was exactly how you fought them before. Regardless, whichever method you choose, calling this a trial when the tower climb leading up to it was way harder and more interesting is a complete misdirection. I wish I could say it gets better, but I could never lie to you. The Tiger's Trial comes out swinging with an even weaker resistance. It's just Wolf, but faster. Again, no unique spin or combo, just an enemy you've already fought, now slightly harder. The increased speed does mean that you have to parry in rapid succession, making the timing a little tense, and you're parrying a lot more in total, which I'm guessing is why they thought it might be harder. But it's not. At all. It's 1 button press at the same interval, and they give you so much time. I had 4 minutes left compared to the 10 to 30 seconds in Snake. If anything, this should have been the first trial, but that still wouldn't earn its place as an endgame combat challenge. There's not enough going on for it to shine. Somehow, though, the Crane's Trial is even easier. They give you 10 minutes to beat a powered-up ninja. All you need to do is hold down parry, Grand Slam, and recovery smash it in under 30 seconds. This is not okay. The parry needed to be nerfed, or at least take some abilities away, lower the time, add new attacks, make me fight 2 at once, something to make it last longer than a Force's bonus level. This was embarrassing to witness, and a total de-escalation of everything that came before. Why did these trials keep getting easier? The difficulty curve actually felt reversed by design. The towers were all more challenging and out of order. 3 was the easiest, 2 was by far the hardest, 1 was harder than 5. What happened here? I feel like they knew they messed up too, because just when you thought it would keep going downhill, they crank it all the way back up and then some with the Master King's Trial. This isn't just hard. This is one of the steepest difficulty spikes I have ever seen in any game, period. This is the boss rush we've been wanting. You have to fight all 3 titans back to back on 1 set of 400 rings, unable to Psy-loop any back. The ultimate test to see if you've mastered the combat and a chance to relive some of Frontier's best moments. Unfortunately, one simple change has both fixed and ruined these pieces of content, leaving nothing but a graveyard of souls in its wake. Parrying has been converted into a perfect parry for this trial, meaning you can no longer hold it forever. It must be timed right before you take a hit, like an actual parry. Look at that. This is great in principle, because now keen observation and quick thinking are skills that must be applied in combat, taking away those bland sequences of hold and wait in favor of actually paying attention to the boss's attacks to try and counter them. However, it becomes immediately clear why the game didn't operate like this, because the telegraphing is a junkyard. You have no idea when these attacks are going to connect with you. Some wind-up animations are enormous. You'll try to parry it 3 times before it ever comes out. Giganto spins around in a full circle, passing you twice, and then hits, because why not? Meanwhile, he swipes you here, and it's instant. How do you predict that? You can't. You take the hit and memorize it. That's the problem. Instead of reading attack telegraphs to intuit when they're going to happen and getting to feel good about it, you have to make an educated guess on what the timing is because every single one is different. Some wind up, others barely at all, and some are even late. Knight has a vertical swing that you want to counter right as it happens, but then his horizontal slash fully passes you before impact. It's not the start of the slash you block, it's the middle. Why? I don't know, that's just how it is for this one attack. And your distance from the boss can change what timing you need to memorize in a way you could only dream of figuring out. Moments like this can make it really hard to tell if you were too early or late. So you might not even know what mistake you're trying to learn from, and that's the worst kind of difficulty. It can feel impossible to gauge when the enemy's jagged hitbox is going to collide with yours without resorting to rote memorization. And every time you get hit, you gotta watch that same knockback animation that flips the camera around and holds it there for 3 seconds before panning back over, likely into another attack that you couldn't see. I know he has that squiggly line that indicates an incoming strike, but it's so faint I can never see it. In all honesty, Giganto isn't that bad. He actually has an attack that I do think is telegraphed well. When he goes to clap, you can watch for his hands to enter the side of the screen, and that's your moment to react. That makes sense to me. It's not instantaneous, not a fake out. It's acceptable. Same with Knight. Yeah, his slashes are kind of ridiculous. But most of the fight is dodging and wailing on him. There's actually not much parrying involved at all. And the Buzzsaw shield is a simple enough shape to identify its outline in the midst of battle. So even though the new parry timing is rough and figuring it out can be confusing and irritating, you don't have to be good at it to beat these two. You'll lose some time, but you could fail every single one and still get right back in the action to deal some damage. Wyvern sucks. This is it right here, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the reason why this update is mixed. Every problem is seen, felt, and breathed in as you suffer in perfect parry purgatory. There are 2 phases you switch between. The first is a chase to reach Wyvern's head. You can either fly there, which takes too much time, or parry an incoming missile to skip ahead. To its credit, what used to be an unreasonably boring phase where you wait and hold now has you searching the area for your next input, keeping you engaged. But that comes at the cost of I can't see jack. Between the boss, HUD, Sonic's glow, and rapidly changing background, I'm assaulted with visual clutter. Sometimes it works. Over the ocean, where you get that color contrast, a clear shot of all the missiles, you can see which one is pulling ahead, bam! That feels good. Give me another. When it works, I think this is a big improvement over the normal fight. But when it doesn't, good heavens. There are so many red and yellow particle effects going on from you and the boss. And you know what else is red and yellow? The lights on the missiles. Best of luck trying to I Spy these Waldos, they blend right in. Sometimes coming from the side, completely unannounced. The one you had your eyes on turned out to be the wrong one. Wyvern can decide to block the screen with his tail. And in the second half, he sends out a bunch of red rings, adding even more scarlet confusion. Look at this sequence right here. This embodies everything that can go wrong. I'm focused on these missiles on the right side. There's a ton of red and yellow obscuring the missiles coming from the left. There's black and brown geology in the background, making it even harder to see the black missile casings, and the missile that looked like it was gonna hit me actually missed and was hiding the real one right behind it. Unreal. Get me an ice pack and a bowl of cherries, I'm gonna be here a while. All they had to do was make the missile closest to you stand out in some way. Make it brighter, blink more, beep, anything. As is, how much eye squinting you have to do is totally dependent on where you are over the island. It's random. The health bar is in the way, look at how low that thing is. I found that staying in the corner opposite to Wyvern gave me the best view, but there's so much noise going on, your best bet is to lie and wait until you see one get really close rather than trying to anticipate where it's coming from. It's a shame because I do think there's more good than bad here, and the missiles themselves are intuitive to parry when I can see them. It's just that the bad is really bad now. Then we go into phase 2. You've caught up, the camera pans, and Wyvern will slash at you. Okay. This is it. This is the attack that ruins everything. You want to talk nonsensical hitboxes, unnaturally long wind-up animations, and instantaneous parry windows? Welcome to the end of days. The first time around, he does one swipe. And this one has some logic. He pulls back for a long time letting you get ready and then brings it down for you to counter. It is pretty fast, but you can use his head as an indicator. He pushes it forward right before the attack comes out, so if you parry then, you'll nail it every time. It's the second half that goes off the rails. He spins around and does a new faster slash, but unlike the first, which had a long rise and quick fall, This one just rolls around without a discernible apex. It kinda speeds up at the end, but it's so minor you can't tell when it's gonna make contact. And since every attack has been different, you don't have any pre-existing rules to follow either. Immediately after, he does a slower strike. It's similar to the first where his head goes forward, but the claw is so far away during impact, it's not even on the same plane as me yet. But that's when you're supposed to parry it. Again, no consistency for me to latch onto. If this was any other attack, it would have been too early. How about a surprise tail swipe? What is that? Did you see how much windup there was? He spins around 3 times, then pushes his tail into you with maybe 2 frames of animation to react. What is happening? There are actually 3 different tail attacks that can sneak their way into your run, all equally insane. One happens in the first half with considerably less windup, but at the same speed, and I have no idea how I dodged it, I just panicked and got lucky. And the third one happens in the second half when you chain him up. He breaks through it all and counterattacks you with another slow windup, but most of it's off screen and then comes in at the last second. It's another delayed fake out too. You don't parry it when it starts coming into frame like your knee-jerk response may encourage, you do it slightly after. Why? Because it said so, why else? This is like that game where you hold your hands out and your friend tries to slap him before you move. But at least there I can scream at him for what he's done. It bears repeating that the depth perception doesn't give great feedback. This is too far away, but this isn't. How you would pick up on that intuitively is beyond me. Sometimes you can get hit by a missile during the transition period, knocking you out of parry range. That is impressively broken. But hey, so what if you can't get the timing right? Giganto and Knight had the same problem and I excused it there. Well, unlike the other Titans who are vulnerable during most of their fights, Wyvern can only be damaged after parrying him. So you have to master this insane timing in order to win. And if you mess up, you don't get to try again right away. Oh no, you go back to the missile phase. You gotta sit there and wait for another deflect to give you a second chance at an attack you don't even understand. Failed again? Repeat. Maybe you nail the first swipe but can't get the second? Repeat. Hit by a missile in transition again because playtesting's overrated? Repeat. Suddenly, all those time-wasting moments that looked cool start wearing away your patience. Staring at Wyvern, waiting for him to run away, waiting for him to send out missiles, waiting for the animation to bring you to him, watching the same unskippable cutscenes mid-fight every time. All that for a measly attempt at understanding this convoluted mess. And remember, you're on the clock. By that point, you'll probably be out of rings and die, which means you have to restart the entire thing from the beginning. Now, I got no problem with that. The whole point of a boss rush is to do it on one life. My vendetta is with all that waiting in between. Forced cutscenes, QTEs, those periods of downtime I just specified, and most of all, that forsaken running sequence to reach Wyvern. This takes 2 minutes to get from the ground to supersonic every time you die. And it's not fun. It's slow, barely has any quick stepping, basic homing attack chains, and has nothing to do with fighting the actual boss. Aren't these trials about mastering combat? Why am I running? I just did a bunch of that on the way up here. This should not have been included. It's a killer to any motivation you might have had, and an insult to have to do just to get back to the fight you're already upset with. If that was removed and the cutscenes were skippable, I think people would have tolerated this. It's that significant. So grab a stressed ball and quell those violent tendencies while you still can. How fitting that the angriest song in the game is playing too. Lyrics like "You'll wake the beast inside" and "I've been here waiting for the longest time," and it just happens to be the longest fight. It would almost be poetic if I wasn't ready to snap. I gave it 3 attempts over 37 minutes before consulting the internet because I was not having fun. Between all the waiting and unclear attacks, I needed to know what I was doing wrong, or at least share in the pain, and you know what I found out? You can mash the parry. If you can't be bothered to figure out the timing, just mash and the results will shock you. It's not a guarantee, it will mess up here and there, but it works way more than it fails, around a 70% success rate. And those are odds I will take, because as soon as I tried this, I won. Easily. I suffered for 40 minutes, cheated out of desperation, and it worked. So I didn't even get to feel good about the win. What a catastrophe. I love difficult games, but this was one of the most infuriating things the franchise ever put me through. The complaints from everyone are totally justified. Assuming you're playing on hard mode. Yeah, turns out the difficulty level changes how long you can hold the parry. Hard is roughly 1/15 of a second. Normal is a quarter second, and easy mode gives you 1 full second to hold it down, which is plenty of time. If you haven't played the game yet and plan to, switch to easy mode for this trial. I did this on my second playthrough and I cleared it first try without taking a single hit. All of those ambiguous wind-up animations and instantaneous swipes became acceptable, predictable even. Because you have such a wider margin of error, reacting to the enemy's movements and not some vaguely specific frame when they get close actually yields results. There's positive feedback now. You know if you were too early or late and can still mash if you thought you mistimed it. I think the entire game could have functioned just fine using this parry timing. Imagine how much better prepared you would have been too if you already fought these bosses in the campaign like this. Or at least if the other trials used it in some way. They already incorporate parrying to a degree, so I think it would have been a great chance to practice it before the big finale. Certainly would have made that ninja fight less pathetic. Because they really do spring it on you out of nowhere and expect you to anticipate things that you never had to and, frankly, suck. Switching to easy mode was an eye-opening revelation. I couldn't believe how playable, dare I say, intuitive these bosses became. I'm not saying you won't have any struggles, you still gotta pay attention and watch your ring count, but so long as you quick side-loop as often as you can to inflict triple damage, spam cross-slash or any strong attack, and don't take any silly hits in between battles, like how in the beginning of Night if you stand still he can't hit you, you're golden. It's really easy. So easy, in fact, that I did the unthinkable. I replayed the King's Trial, this time on normal. And it was harder, but I was doing well, parrying attacks I would have never been able to on my first try, making it to Night with 165 rings despite my errors. I would have won too, had I known that was insta-kill. As I continued playing like this, I noticed something started to change in me. By gradually increasing the difficulty from a manageable starting point, I began to familiarize myself with the tighter parry windows. Attacks became more and more clear with far less frustration than I ever had prior. Upon completion, I felt ready to tackle hard mode again, something you couldn't have begged me to do beforehand. And while it still took me a couple tries, and definitely has telegraphing issues no matter how you slice it, I see this in a totally different way now. The dual perspectives of being a newcomer, not knowing what to do, and mastering it. Now that I understand the rules, I enjoy perfect parrying these bosses in a similar way to how I enjoy other games that do handle their difficulty really well, which makes me think that if there was proper build-up to this, better teaching mechanics, or even just putting the trial on easy by default, this could have worked as is. It at least would have been better. The other trials even ask if you want to lower the difficulty if you fail too many times, but I think this trial should have asked you straight away, recommending that you stick to easy and work your way up. Because this is not something you should dive into headfirst. Personal skill level aside, it's a massive difficulty spike in anyone's eyes with too many rough edges to ignore. I have a hunch we're gonna see a big divide in player anecdote over the years, because the only people playing on hard mode right away are Sonic fans. We're all in the same circle, hearing the same information, game is too easy, secret final boss on hard. A regular guy isn't gonna know any of that. He's probably gonna play on normal and have a much better time than the rest of us. Unless you're playing after the recent patch. As I'm sure you could imagine, altering the King's Trial was at the top of their priority list. And I think they nailed it. The new hard mode is nearly perfect. Some attacks are beyond saving, of course, but the parry window feels so much more play-tested now, accounting for how these titans operate, landing somewhere in between the old easy and normal modes. It's not too generous, where you can hold it a full second beforehand, and it's definitely not frame perfect, where your only hope is to memorize. With a few exceptions, I think they achieved a very balanced middle ground where reacting to when the attack starts coming towards you is how to succeed. And if that's still too much, normal mode increases the parry timing by about double, and easy mode gives you a 10-second window, which is basically infinite, so it's funny they even capped it. 600 total rings, scales boss HP down, and puts your attack at level 25. So yeah, if you're really struggling, easy mode is a guaranteed win. But either way, the difficulty spike has been dulled. kinda wish there was a way to at least play the old version, since I started getting good at it. Maybe beating hard unlocks a legacy mode where the old 3 difficulties are an option. Not necessary though, the new hard mode is my preferred way of fighting all 3 of these titans now, and honestly, I wish there was a way to play the entire game like this. Once the trial is complete, Sonic will at last gain access to the finale, and can swap to the other characters to continue island exploration. No, you can't swap on the fly, you have to come back here every time, which is annoying, but then you remember the tornado and realize the entire map would unravel. When you feel like the blinding rage has left your mind, you're ready to take on the brand new final battle. This is the moment we were waiting for. The original ending's final bosses were pretty lame. Supreme was a worse version of Giganto, lacking originality and flourish, and the end was a by-the-numbers bullet hell that, in its own context, was fine, but as the big send-off was a huge tonal departure, failing to capture the highs of the previous Titans. Knowing that this was one of the main things they were going to change, I was very excited. So you can imagine my disappointment when Supreme was exactly the same. He's still a Giganto clone without any new attacks to make him distinct. They didn't beef up his health to not get shredded by max stats. The QTE is bland, his wings go unused, and the strategy for beating him is still somewhat cryptic in that you need to break his drones. As it stands, this is the only piece of content that gets recycled across both endings, really exaggerating the fact that they could have touched it up in any of the ways I mentioned, but didn't. So unfortunately, Supreme remains as the underwhelming 4th Titan that couldn't measure up. Although, this was pretty funny. I had no idea I'm Here was written from the boss's perspective. Phase 2 is where it's at. This is a completely original remaking of the end fight. The moon comes down, attaching a cable to Supreme's body, reawakening it with new power. He tries to fight it off, but ultimately fails, sprouting a bunch of arms from his back. Meanwhile, an orchestral version of I'm Here starts playing, and the way it syncs up with the title card is pretty chilling. The intro section is scripted to show that you can't parry his attacks, and each hit lowers your max ring capacity by 30, totaling at a 120 ring loss by the end on hard mode. It's too bad I never saw that until looking back at my footage. Maybe if the text shook more, blinked bright red, made a ring loss sound effect, anything to grab my attention, I would have noticed. After 4 rounds of that, you get a cutscene of Sonic unleashing the new power given to him by Master King Coco, resulting in a powered-up supersonic state with blue eyes, red outline, Super Saiyan 2 sparks, and a mix of red and yellow particles to show the blending of chaos energy with cyberspace. And it looks so good. In terms of gameplay, everything is the same, except perfect parrying is unlocked, and the only way to reflect attacks. Now it's making sense. All of that practice suddenly clicks in. This is what they were trying to prepare you for, and wow did they get that backwards, because this is nowhere near as challenging as that trial. Phase 1 is all about severing the cord to stop his self-healing, so you can beat him down enough to trigger Phase 2. Meanwhile, those orbs will keep on coming, knocking 30 rings off of your max count and pushing you farther away each time. If you parry them though, you'll not only keep your rings in positioning, but you'll get this cool deflecting animation at the end. And similar to Knight's Shield, these are really intuitive shapes to gauge when they're about to hit you. And their formations get more elaborate the longer it goes on, with a couple of clever fakeouts. There are some slashes afterwards with a breakout QTE if you fail, and an unapologetically shonen grand slam animation if you succeed. It just topples right in front of the camera, I can't even tell what's happening. And the over-the-shoulder glare totally silent, who is this guy? If you quick Psyloop, it'll create a whirlwind pushing Supreme up into the moon. Parry the laser attack and you can do it again. Then once enough time passes, Sonic will snap his fingers and crush him inside of it. This might be the most graphic imagery in a Sonic game. You should follow me on Twitch. Not a chance. Phase 2 is almost identical to the first, only if you get hit by the orbs now, you'll enter a minute-long cutscene of this giant energy ball knocking the super out of you, then immediately repowering up like it was nothing. It's pretty drawn out for a mid-battle scene, but I won't lie. When the music syncs up just right, it's impossible not to smile. It's like the DVD logo hitting the corner. I used to think this was unskippable, but that's only for the first attempt. After that, you get the prompt, and I really wish all the cutscenes operated like that. Oh yeah, and your ring count is reduced all the way to 100 after it's done. No matter how many you had beforehand, this attack always brings you down to a flat 100. Not that you need that many rings to beat him anyway, but what an interesting effect. When it's all said and done, Sonic launches Supreme into the air with a barrage of punches and kicks, sending him straight into the moon. One more couldn't hurt. Well, not me anyway. To deal the finishing blow, Sonic flies into Supreme's gun to become the bullet. Let that sentence sink in. Turning into a crazy cyber form that I would have loved to play as, but oh well. And then zipping right through both bosses simultaneously, defeating the threat. Having Eggman be the one to pull the trigger was a great touch as well. This shot of him steadying his aim while Kellen is choiring it up in the background, it just gets me. I like how when it's time to end it, he tells Sonic it's now or never, which was the same thing Sonic told Sage in the original ending. Frontiers has so many references, it even calls back to itself. Overall, this takes the anti-climax of the original end fight and turns it into a legitimate fifth Titan. There are a lot of different elements at play. The spectacle is back in full force, the cover of I'm Here is great, I hope Kellen continues to be a part of Sonic music. This is a huge turnaround for the ending that will leave players much more satisfied. That is, assuming you even make it past step 1. Ah boy, this is where we get to perhaps the most miscommunicated information of the entire game. Severing that dang cable. It's fair enough to assume that the cord needs taken out, but how you lock onto it is unclear. You can fly around and punch all you want, that reticle will not move until you press dodge. And not on its own either, you have to be in the middle of a combo, then hit the bumper. This is not a learned mechanic, you are never taught how to switch targets, nor have you needed to, and with Perfect Parry being given the spotlight, the idea of dodging isn't going to be at the front of your mind. For these reasons, many players were trapped in limbo here, unsure of how to proceed until caving in and looking it up online. It's a very simple, essential rule of the fight that they could have put in the boss's description, but chose not to. In fact, the reward for 100%ing this DLC is a hint that tells you how to dodge to target the cord. Yeah, they knew it might be confusing and still didn't change it. They'll stop you in place to read a prompt that says you're fighting the final boss. Oh shoot, I didn't realize. But they won't tell you how to do a basic, necessary function that they admitted to knowing was unintuitive. Not a great start. It is possible to figure this out for yourself and cut the cord by other means. It's just random. Wild Rush is a pretty common move that's activated by first pressing the dodge button, so if this is in your repertoire, then you may be trying to attack the head and end up locking onto the cable by complete accident. Crisis averted, this happened to me pretty often. Cyclone Kick, a skill I frequently use, just so happens to damage the head and cable at the same time, hitting 2 birds with 1 stone. Except not always. When I tried this again on a different playthrough, it just didn't work. I could not get the cord to break for reasons I'm still unaware of. And I think that speaks to the greater issue of this boss. There are too many inconsistencies with poor conveyance, leaving the player confused, potentially learning the wrong lessons before the right ones. For example, I didn't know you had to Psyloop his back here, so I just sat there until the phase restarted, missing my shot, and I know a lot of other people who did the same. The other Titans can sometimes stagger for a bit when you do a bunch of damage to them quickly, so you could easily mistake this for one of those occasions, thinking that the cord coming back down is the following phase. I know that when in doubt, Psyloop is the Frontiers mantra, so that's on me, but they could have made Supreme stay down indefinitely to ensure you had enough time to remember that, because I was convinced that I needed to parry all the attacks to move on. And can you really blame me? Given that it's the hot new skill unique to this form of Supersonic, and you went through all that hardship to master it, I thought it was the key to success. Seemed appropriate. I spent 20 minutes parrying all these orbs over and over, putting up with that insidious camera, then kept failing on the slashes because the second one has an even worse hitbox than Wyvern, so I would have to keep repeating the whole thing just to get back to that one part, only to randomly lock onto the cable again and realize I didn't have to do any of that. Is anyone else bothered by that? That despite Perfect Parry being given all this attention, you don't actually have to use it? That if you gun for the cord and spam cross slash, you can beat him in, I kid you not, 60 seconds? The same move again and again, skipping all the good stuff. It seems wrong. The fight instantly goes from convoluted to way too easy. There's no in-between. I feel like having designated phases would have been the better approach. Start by breaking the cord, parry some orbs, preferably where I can see, deal damage, do some other big attack, repeat, then final QTE. This would ensure that you're getting all the moments and not getting suckered into blocking attacks that don't matter or not knowing what to do. Because there are many components of this fight you can totally miss by sheer accident. On my initial playthrough, I never saw the Grand Slam counterattack because I couldn't nail the parry. That weird over-the-shoulder close-up camera that comes out of nowhere didn't activate for whatever reason. I never got hit by the orbs in Phase 2, so I didn't see that long cutscene. Supreme never attacked my friends, I didn't even know that was possible. And I failed to parry the laser during the quick Psyloop, so he fell back back down, robbing me of the crushing animation. A lot of this fight's appeal is borderline optional, and when you combine that with the cryptic nature of the weak point, especially after having just gone through that blood-boiling boss rush, this could really sour the ending for you. Suddenly all those cool moments don't mean a thing, because your patience is gone and you just want to get it over with. I was really mixed on this when I first played it. It had all the bullet points for what I wanted, yet I still felt dissatisfied. And that's probably because a lot of the moments people were freaking out about, I didn't even get to see. I wasted my time trying to parry attacks that didn't matter, getting hit by the same poorly telegraphed one, constantly blinded by these insufferable trees, after an hour of already losing my mind. I really wonder how different it would have been if I swapped to easy mode for the trial right away, and already knew how to target the cable. Would I have been grinning ear to ear like half the player base was? Like I was playing the first 3 Titans? Or has the hype died down? This DLC came out almost a full year after Frontiers released. The shock value of these battles has long since passed. Maybe I'm just not as wowed as I used to be. They're still cool, don't get me wrong, but nothing will ever be like that first time when Undefeatable kicked in. That is a one-of-a-kind memory. Unfortunately, I'll never know the answer to that because that's not the experience I had. It is worth mentioning that they added a button prompt to Knight's shield telling you to hit R1 to dodge around it, which could plant the idea in your head for when you get to the final boss, since you unlock it right after the trial. However, it only appears on easy mode, so if the majority of players are on higher difficulties, this won't help them. I think adding the prompt to the final boss is all that needs to be done. It wouldn't make the fight any easier, it would just inform you on what you need to do. The game at least ends on a good note story-wise. Eggman's standing in the exact spot as the old ending, only now Sage is by his side and he tells her they can go home together, finally calling her his daughter. It's very wholesome, gives me those happy chills. Even though they could have had way more development, it's still a good scene on its own that leaves you with a warm, fuzzy feeling inside. Closing on a vocal version of I'm With You in the credits and a thank you from Sonic Team that wasn't there before. This was added in for the DLC, likely in response to all the feedback we gave and for sticking with them. It can't be easy to have a million different voices telling you what you should be doing, so I applaud them for listening to so many ideas and really trying to give the fans what they wanted. It may not have landed for everyone, but a lot of people were touched by this game. Even someone like me who didn't love every second of it, I had fun discovering the Starfall Islands and look back at my time playing it very fondly. Final Horizon is a lot like the main game. I think there's more good than bad here, but the extremes are higher. I really like the platforming. I love the towers, music is top-notch yet again, the puzzles are well above decent, but combat is still mediocre, character control isn't the best, the final challenges are polarizing, and there's a slight downgrade in polish across the entire update. I ran into a number of new oddball glitches. When approaching Tank this one time, the music didn't start. Do we shake hands or? Then it randomly kicked back in when I was on the ground under the arena. And when I went back up to try again, a second instance of the song fired up. So now I'm hearing 2 of the same EDM beat playing out of sync with each other, desperately trying to not reach for the axe. If you want to become a shell of your former self, try listening to this, and farewell. I'm gonna kill! The only way to shut it off is by quitting out to reload the file. And yes, this did happen a few times, it wasn't just a one-off. Another reason not to fight these cretins. Audio seemed to be a recurring issue. All throughout the island are different side story cutscenes like before, only now each character has their own set, and some are pretty charming, like how the stacks of rocks were built by the ancients as a traditional game of Jenga, and if their tower was knocked over, they would rejoice because it meant they got to start over and keep playing. This wouldn't happen to be a metaphor, would it, Sonic Team? That being said, most of these will likely fall into that disposable flavor text category where there's no animation. They're fine, they're optional, but the voiceover would periodically not play. The first Amy cutscene I got didn't have any voices until the very last line.
Poor little things.
And this didn't happen once or twice, or even 3 times, or 4, 5, 10, 15, no, this happened 18 times. I was in shock. I started to question if all the lines were even recorded. There was a scene that didn't have any voiceover. Some where it cuts out midway then comes back again, and others where you're given a front row seat to Tails' ventriloquism. It was so lame to see, man. Like, it wasn't a big deal for me, but if I was someone who really wanted to see these and hung on to every word these characters said, I would be taken right out of it if the dialogue was only partially voiced. If you have subtitles off, you're done for. I don't think this glitch is too common though, so I may be in the minority. Also, I do believe they fixed it in the patch. There was an interesting bug where the time of day was changing and it completely shrouded this forest in darkness. Leave? Totally fine. Go back in? Pitch black until the lighting inevitably caught back up. It was kind of cool, actually. Cyberspace also had a few bugs. Oh yeah, cyberspace. I gotta talk about this. I touched upon cyberspace much earlier, and the reason why I didn't go into detail back then is because I didn't play these until after I beat the game and saw someone mention that they were really good. I don't even know there was cyberspace in this update. When you start out as Amy, or any of the other characters, the portals are inactive. It's only when swapping to Sonic that you can access them, but since I always had an abundance of Lookout Cocoa, the towers were always on my waypoint, so I never needed to deviate. It was only on my second playthrough where I was speedrunning that it came in handy, and even then, it still might have been faster to look for signs. Contrary to the first Uranos having mostly original stages, all 9 portals in Final Horizon take a pre-existing cyber stage and modify it heavily. Backgrounds and assets are still the same and the music is remixed, but the pathways and shortcuts added are very much in line with the direction we've been coercing Sonic Team to go in. Less automation, big branching paths, and ramps leading to airborne activity. To the point where some of these may as well be different stages. Hey, look, a secret spring. Oh, we did not like that. 4A uses 1-4 as a base, but quickly becomes its own thing when these honeycomb hexagons get placed everywhere. Boost jumping is a constant tool to cross gaps, although it's not without its vertical sections to break it up. The same asset being copied doesn't even look bad here. It's like I'm climbing a big treehouse. And just like when I was a kid, bees are the enemy. 4B is insane. There are tons of new pathways crisscrossing every which way, unrecognizable to Green Forest at times. The ending is really high stakes and exciting with falling platforms that are telegraphed well in advance so you can plan your route while you're still in the air. 4C is all about the rocket boost, a power-up that behaves a lot like how the old boost was, distorting the screen, going faster, and destroying enemies. Admittedly though, there's not much else to it, it's more for style. This level in particular is pretty automatic. Even though there are branching paths, you're holding boost for all of it while the game turns for you. The ending is a full-on 30-second straight line where nothing can stop you. I would have appreciated some more platforming, dodging, open areas, or at least opportunities to skip the automation by taking a different route that was more difficult. At the same time though, if you are going to make a boost to win stage, then going all in on the sensory element is what I would do, and I think they pulled that off pretty well here. The small pause on impact, intense screen vibration, high-pitched squealing, and brain-blasting Arrow of Time remix make for a palpable sense of velocity that, if nothing else, is fun to experience one time. 4A also had the rocket boost and was better utilized for the most part, letting you move around, but was still relegated to small sections since it cancels when you uncurl. I feel like this was a missed opportunity to have it act as a power-up that you could use until it ran out. They could place boost capsules at specific points all throughout the stage, so that the players who were really good could grab each one and make it to the goal without ever running out. Maybe next time. 4D is based on 4-3, which was one of the cooler original stages. I just call it Ramp City though, because that's clearly what they were thinking. There are many different routes to take, rails to grind, and plenty of flying through the air. Love to see it. Where are you taking me? However, there is definitely a reliance on asset spam. Boosting off ramps is cool, but when it's the majority of what the level has to offer, the excitement tapers off and starts to become gimmicky. Boost off ramp, land. Boost off another, land. Homing attack, land. It's a lot of the same stuff. And I have a feeling this is because they had to work around the limitations of the original level's size. Much like the open zone, if you can't build wider, build higher, and that's what they did. This is also where you'll notice that the pop-in absolutely affects cyberspace, sometimes obscuring an essential pathway until you get close enough. Still a cool stage, but much less smooth. 4E is a 1.5 remix that dials back on the ramps, thankfully, in favor of slightly modifying the original level design and stacking new stuff on top of it, keeping the linear sense of direction intact, but with a lot of little innovations to keep you guessing, like shortcuts that didn't exist before. Unlike 4D though, where you had this big open space with a bunch of lower areas that didn't matter because they all led to the same place and looked identical, Sonic is going to die. There's a ticking time bomb at play that will kill you if it hits 0, so you either need to reach the goal before that, or collect the various stopwatch bonuses to gain more time. So getting curious about the level design and making a few stops along the way can be crucial to your survival. My goodness, did they actually add a collectible to cyberspace that matters to the gameplay? I mean, it's from Generations, but still, I'm impressed. As for the level itself, it's pretty fun, albeit with some enemy placement issues. How do I? They put them right in front of you where they get blocked by the timer on screen. Maybe they want you to spin dash here to go through them, but spin dashing hasn't been mandatory for anything, so that would be pretty unfair of them to suddenly require it unannounced. Besides, there are hills everywhere. You can't risk flying off one, especially before a necessary loop. 4F kind of falls into the 4D trap again, where we have all these tiny new additions sprinkled around that are cool, but ultimately slower ways of getting to the same place, so you're never gonna go there. It's like the Mortar Canyon curse. You have different options of how to proceed, but sticking to the main path is still optimal, so why bother? And since it's based on 2-4, we're dealing with a very short, very linear stage that limits the amount of potential it can work with. That being said, I do think speedrunning it is pretty fun. There's a brand new upper path with plenty of space to move around and keep the flow going. A lower path under the whole thing, again, no reason to take it, but kinda cool. And above all else, it is an improvement over the initial design, adding some extra layers to an otherwise straightforward act. 4G is based on 4-2, a very popular stage for its lengthy multiple pathways, and I think they've managed to make it even better. More platforming, even more routes, mid-air tricks, and less automation. This was probably my favorite one to explore. There's just one problem. The gimmick has Sonic behaving like a car. The boost starts out low, but as you hold it down, the meter fills up, pushing you into a second speed state that goes faster. Keep holding it and you'll go into third, then finally top speed. Hold it for too long though and Sonic will overheat, causing him to combust on the spot. It's a neat idea that has you managing your acceleration, rewarding you for maintaining it after long periods of time, and I think the HUD is really stylish, but if you stop for any reason, you reset back to 0, and it is slow. Top speed isn't a bonus here, it's the default rate you've already been playing at. So most of your time is spent running at a less than satisfying pace, frequently getting interrupted by not just colliding with an object, but any time you uncurl from a ball. This can be from hitting a spring, running off a platform, launching off a ramp, or letting go of the jump button before you land. Yeah, remember that? You are at a constant war to keep the pacing somewhat high, undercutting how good the level design actually is. It's still fun, but the whole time I'm thinking about how much more fun I know it would be. I think we should have started at the normal speed and then kept getting faster from there, going beyond limits even the spin dash couldn't show us. 4H is a remix of one of my favorite levels, 4-4, and might be the only one that I don't outright prefer over the original. It's not bad, but it strips away a lot of the excitement by replacing a majority of the rail grinding and platforming with big linear boosting segments where you can't do anything besides go straight, broken up by basic homing attack chains and awkward stock asset box jumping. There are some cool shortcuts you can take to bypass that, like using the ramp to go above the orange hoops, landing on one of the big boxes, which you can then use to boost off of and reach the pulley, a similar boost jump to an enemy chain, and an air boost after another ramp launch. But there is a distinct lack of personality and variety in the gameplay. We needed more moments like falling down to a secret lower area, or anything that wasn't just another homing chain to hit a spring. 4I is the very last cyber stage, but because I thought it was 4-1, I played it first. And that was a mistake. It's the only one to have moon gravity, and being my first exposure, I thought they were all gonna be like that, and I started to sweat. It's a fine enough gimmick when it works, but most of the platforming is a crawl, because when you go up, it takes eons to come back down, and you don't always have a platform under you to safely stomp, nor do I want to constantly do that. When you can actually play the level though, it is cool. It's 1-7 in reverse with a lot of ascending rail grinding, cool camera shots, and arenas of space to fly around. I think they should have gone all in on the concept, make the whole thing one big uphill battle. Rail launching in low gravity feels great, and it's not a sensation you can get anywhere else in the game, so embracing the verticality that this movement brings to the table is something I'd want to see more of. Like before, every cyber stage has a set of objectives that award you with Lookout Cocoa in return. However, the mission list has been modified. The green number rings return yet again. They're alright. You just collect them in descending order, and sometimes they're in a tricky spot like over falling platforms or at a specific height after a jump, but most of the time they are right next to each other, basically handed out for free. At which point it becomes more about finding them than the actual collecting aspect. Because while a couple are right in your face, like 4C, they don't even try here, the vast majority are not on the main path, requiring you to explore a bit. 4F has a peculiar setup off to the side where you home in on single block platforms, and 4H spreads them out across nearly the entire stage. stage, taking you to a secret route underneath. The only one that was truly annoying was after this jump in 4E because it blends right into the background and once again gets blocked by the timer, so it took me like 5 tries to even realize it was there. The silver moon rings are a little better. Like in Forces, you have to grab them all within the time limit of touching the first, which can actually be kind of challenging. 4E's definitely tested me. But it's still the same charade. They're all next to each other, usually off the beaten path, and solely exist to be collected. 4Fs in particular took me a very long time to find, really showing off how layered that stage is. Wow, that's great. Then we have a variant mission that not all the stages have. Some will have an alternate hidden goal ring. Not since CD and Colors have we seen this idea of multiple end goals, and it's way more fleshed out here. Sometimes it's as simple as taking the high road, going past the initial ending. That gave me some Westopolis flashbacks. Or taking a completely different path, branching off near the end of the level with distant enemies alluding to it. This was really fun. It wasn't some obligatory collectible item for the sake of having one. I was rewarded with new content for going in a different direction without needing to completely change my playstyle. I want to see this come back in another game. I think it would be an easy mainstay for the series. Not every stage has one though, unfortunately. Some of them experiment with other variants, like a race against a hologram Tails. It's a fancy way of saying there's a time limit, but I like it. It's basically a secondary S rank with a follow-along visual. Then we have the Don't Hit Any Mines mission. Yeah. In a few stages, an exclamation point will appear above your head with a beeping sound, signaling that there's a mine nearby. Get too close, and it blows up. Simple enough. In fact, so simple that if you removed it, I wouldn't miss it. It shows up in 2 levels, maybe 3 times each, and is so negligible I cleared the mission on accident. Which I'm glad about because that beeping sound becomes unbearable when you're trying to platform and keep messing up because the depth perception is a hurricane of suckage. Yeah, needless to say, I'm not a big fan of this one. I think they could scrap it and nobody would mind. Maybe if it only beeped prior to detonation and they used actual mines on the ground that you could see, it would work better, but this is just weird. The way it cuts to a zoomed angle, slow motion kicks in, and the explosion is weirdly silent. I don't know, something's off. I'd like to thank my parents for always believing in me. The new collectibles unique to Frontiers are the Animal Buddies. With 2 exceptions, there are 3 in every stage, and once again, the goal is more about finding them since they're usually tucked away on the lower, less common routes. I wish they stood out more though, because I would either scour way too much or be in the completely wrong area. I had to play 4G backwards to find the right route. They do make noise, the walrus really caught me off guard. But that's only when you get close, and it can be hard to hear over the music. I turned it off for comparison's sake, and I must say, running around cyberspace without any music is eerie. I feel like I'm in a Backrooms video. I think making them jump around more to grab your attention or turning up their volume would be a good call. However, these animals aren't simply to be collected. When Sonic grabs one, he must carry it on his back to the designated safe zone while using a limited moveset. You cannot double jump, boost, homing attack, or spin dash. All you can do is jump. This is actually kind of interesting. It makes you approach what would normally be basic level design in a totally different way from the rest of the game because you don't have all your crazy movement to trivialize it. You also can't interact with any springs without dropping the animal, so you'll have to traverse the unique platforming areas made for these missions. It's still mainly about finding the animal because these sections are very short and often contain nothing more than a couple jumps. This one in 4B is especially void of content where you hop over 2 speed boosters, and that's it. What a profound waste of time. But every now and then they will throw in some crooked blocks over a bottomless pit. Now suddenly your hands tense up and you actually care about what's happening. Or a floor of springs that needs carefully navigated. Meanwhile, the bomb timer is still ticking down. I can roll with that. Unfortunately, this is Sonic Frontiers, so there is an exploit that completely nullifies these rules. If you set the animal down manually by pressing the slide button, Sonic regains his abilities instantly. Then, if you pick the animal back up, an animation will start that puts it back on you. But until it's finished, which is about 3 seconds, you can still move normally. And that is all the time you need to double jump and boost your way to the end, bypassing the very restrictions you were meant to play by. Of course, I didn't figure this out until I had already beaten all the missions, and I don't think most players will even know that you can set them down. But still, the lack of polish bleeds into frame once again. And I softlocked, okay. By the way, you have to beat the stage for these to count. If you die during a run, you lose all your collectibles. And that's fine. However, because this is hard mode DLC, they have removed all checkpoints in an attempt to raise the difficulty. So dying at any time resets you to the beginning of the level. Again, that's fine, but for your own sake, please do not try to clear all the missions at once. Just get to the end, move on, and come back later, because I made the mistake of doing it all in one sitting, and I'll keep it $1.50 with you. I was pretty miserable. Not because I kept dying, but because the game stopped working. I can't tell you how many problems I ran into, be it collision, camera, miscellaneous. The random acts of mayhem were off the charts. It starts relatively harmless. Maybe you don't quite understand the rocket boost yet and jump around where you shouldn't. Slip off the inside of this interior and you don't save yourself in time because you're not expecting it. You see this gap and think, hey, I can make that. But then it starts to become less and less about me and more about the game losing its mind. You stomp on this ground and realize, oh, that's not an option. Finally got that animal rescued after being set back 2 minutes. I'm burning the hive tonight. Setting down the third one, locked into the animation, then right as it finishes, you get sniped while your back is turned. You go for a boost jump and get stuck on the side of a loop. Go for another one, but because I walked on the corner, I was no longer on solid ground, so I air boosted instead. When looking for the number rings, I walked backwards and found the 5 here, but as I approached it, it pushed me forward automatically. I try going back in and it keeps pushing me away, even in midair. Apparently, you're not supposed to go back if you miss it. The only way is with a very specific, sometimes questionable looking jump. Also, how did I survive this? I'm falling down, I boost, and it launches me back up. Can't tell if that was generous or broken. I think my favorite glitch has to be right here. If you try skipping the loop, it'll lock you into its scripted shape, except this time it magnetized me to the outer ring, running alongside it for the rest of time. I can't break free, I have to reset. And of all the stages for this to happen in, of course it's the one with this song. You know what though? It's been a while since I was killed by an enemy who wasn't attacking me. Could I get some of that? Thank you. How about flying past the goal ring? I should get an achievement for that. 4D had a couple of stroke-inducing moments where the camera wouldn't face where I needed to go. It would pan behind me like normal, fling me up, and then there was nothing. Only by turning the camera all the way in the opposite direction did I see where I was meant to go. Same thing when reaching the hidden goal. You have to move it left when going off this ramp, flip it all the way around after hitting this spring so you can see the grind rail. Then you gotta flip it again immediately to see the goal ring. How is this greenlit? It's a miracle I didn't die, although don't worry. They got me covered. Holding forward here, the loop is scripted, and now it's not. I'll do you one better though. What if the ramp just didn't send you? Genius. In fact, let's do that 2 more times throughout the game just to shake things up. Really keeps the player on their toes when functionality isn't guaranteed. If you home in on this enemy and stomp after to land on the rail, you'll completely miss it and fall to your death. In the previous boost games, it was a common practice to homing attack a chain of enemies and then stomp afterwards to quickly hit the ground and keep the pace moving. But because Frontiers has a combat animation that pushes you back when attacking, you're no longer positioned above the rail by the time you can make your next input. Frontiers even gets this right in other instances, so I'm surprised it was overlooked here. I said earlier that 4E puts enemies right in front of you while there's a big timer blocking your view, and it bears repeating because what were they thinking with that? Look at the calamity on display. The timer is already big enough, making it hard to see. Now it's flashing red, blending in with the red enemy. I'm going under a bridge that shrouds the area even more. The bomb above my head covers it up when I'm about to approach it, and I have a split second to react after the homing reticle shows up. Well, surely they wouldn't do it a second time. I'm on the clock for this, by the way, especially on the animal mission where I have even less time to work with. I can't afford to deal with all this nonsense slapping me around. Like that, what even was that? What is this? Sometimes they do it right and there's enough warning, but when they start getting fancy with the twists and turns, it all falls apart. Like there, I didn't dodge that on purpose, I just got lucky. 4F was pretty void of problems, which was a nice surprise, except for these spinies that somehow killed me during a homing attack. Why does that keep happening? 4G was also pretty clean, aside from all reliable paying a visit. These boxes can have a mind of their own depending on where you jump off. I was on the corner, and despite holding forward, it made me go left. I don't know why. Another time, same box, only I tapped the stick and it still sent me over the edge. Is there a draft? Poor guy can't even get a full scream out before his demise. I tried jumping on this box, but missed, landing right on a mine. It was more comedic than unfair, but at that point I had already been playing the stage for 40 minutes, so I was over it. Another homing attack chain oversight where the last enemy isn't over the platform, so stomping gets you killed. Can you see why there might be a problem here with losing progress? To reiterate from before, I do think these new cyber stages are excellent. Not all created equal, but experimental and creative in their own right, playing to Frontier's strengths. I'm just imploring you to take it easy and not be a completionist right off the bat, because there are issues. Making it to the end of a stage only to die by some stupid glitch and now you have to redo the whole thing is never fun doesn't feel earned. And it's made even worse when you spend all that extra time trying to clear missions you're not even familiar with yet. Like I said, 4i was the first stage I picked, and had I just gone to the end, it would have been fine. But going after all the collectibles, feeling the wrath of having no checkpoints, all under brand new moon gravity? Oh, it was not a fun time. It poisoned my mood for the rest of them. Even when it is your fault, though, and you made an honest error, the crime doesn't really fit the punishment. Spending 2 minutes on really easy content, then dying to something slightly harder and needing to repeat all of it is a rocky road. I can't say these levels would be worse off if 1 or 2 checkpoints were kept in. When in doubt, you could always add a bonus mission to beat the stage without dying as a compensatory middle ground. I'm not against the idea, but I don't think it totally works here either. I also haven't mentioned the spin dash yet and what benefits that can bring. And that's because I honestly think it's too good here. Don't get me wrong, it's still fun in the way you'd expect it to be, and I like having it as an option, but the new focus on ramps doesn't just open up a few shortcuts. It can fraction the amount of gameplay, crumpling stages with minimal effort. Is it cool? Yes. Is it broken? Absolutely. While not every one of these gets destroyed in the same way, the goal for the next game will definitely be to create stages that can account for both boosting and spin dashing, without either one cutting down on too much of the good stuff. With all of that being said though, that is the Sonic Frontiers Final Horizon DLC. I don't know how this ended up being a longer review than the review of the full game, but here we are. Overall, these updates have been a big success, adding a lot of much-needed polish and features to an already solid enough game that a lot of people liked. Even though this finale is arguably more flawed than the base game, it also contains some of the highest peaks. And at the end of the day, it is completely optional. While it's true they didn't stick the landing quite like I wanted, I think they made some serious strides here that could be the start of something beautiful. And if nothing else, Frontiers will always be a game that the fans will remember. I know I certainly won't be forgetting how I felt when I first played it. That sense of mystery as I uncovered the islands, the shock and awe at the Titans, and the anticipation of not knowing what was going to happen next. Sonic Frontiers had an impact on me. And sometimes, that's all I'm really looking for. Thank you guys so much for watching, and as always, don't forget to check out the next episode whenever I post it, which will probably be soon. Alright. See ya.